A biography of Christopher Kit Carson. Hello and welcome back to another Parry This American Heroes video. Today we're setting out across the raw, untamed West to follow the bootprints of Christopher Kit Carson, a hunter, scout, soldier, and frontier legend whose exploits stitched his name into American folklore. From boyhood on the edge of the wilderness to harrowing campaigns that helped redraw the nation's map, Carson's story is packed with daring escapes, brutal battles, and complicated choices. Saddle up, because the trail ahead is as thrilling as it is unpredictable. Birth and family background: 1809. Christopher Houston Carson was born on December 24th, 1809, near the small frontier settlement of Richmond in Madison County, Kentucky. His parents, Lindsay Carson and Rebecca Robinson Carson, already had a bustling household. Kit, as he would later be called, was the youngest of 10 children from their marriage, and his father had 5 older children from a previous union, making him the 11th of 15 in all. Lindsay traced his family to Scots-Irish roots and had served as a soldier during the American Revolution, experiences that fed a restless spirit unsuited to settled life. Rebecca came from a large Kentucky farming family that prized hard work and resilience. When Kit was just an infant, the Carsons joined the Great Westward movement, following wagon ruts and creek bottoms to the Boone's Lick country along the Missouri River in 1811. The region, today part of Howard County, promised new land but demanded back-breaking labor to clear timber and plant corn. Lindsay's sudden death in a logging accident in 1818 left Rebecca to keep the farm together while her children took on grown-up chores. The loss thrust young Kit into a world where self-reliance, frugality, and courage were daily necessities, lessons that would guide every bold step he later took beyond the frontier's edge. Early life and upbringing: 1818 to 1826. After Lindsay Carson's death, the family's homestead near the Missouri River became both classroom and proving ground for young Kit. With no time or money for regular schooling, he learned instead to split rails, hunt game, and barter with neighboring Osage and Missouri families. By 1824, his mother, worried that her restless son might drift toward trouble, bound him as an apprentice to David Workman, a saddle and harness maker in the river town of Franklin, Missouri. Franklin sat at the head of the Santa Fe Trail, a 900-mile wagon route that linked the United States frontier to Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico, then a province of independent Mexico. Traders camped outside Workman's shop, told stories of prairie storms, buffalo herds, and mountains farther west than any map could show. Kit mended their tack and listened until his ambition outgrew the small brick workshop. In August 1826, not yet 17, he slipped away before dawn and signed on as a drover with a merchant caravan headed for Santa Fe. Breaking an apprenticeship contract was illegal and carried a $50 penalty, a debt he would later repay. The journey rolled across tall grass plains and through the narrow Cimarron Cutoff, where dry stretches forced travelers to ration water from both people and livestock. Kit cooked, herded mules, and learned Spanish from Mexican teamsters, picking up words like arrieros for mule drivers and aguaje for scarce watering spots. The caravan reached Santa Fe in November 1826, and by winter he had moved north to Taos, a plaza town of adobe walls and open-air markets, where he found work as a cook for a mountain man trapping outfit and began the transformation from farm boy to plains adventurer. Mountain man and trapper years, 1826 to 1840. Life in Taos quickly pulled Kit Carson into the fur trade that was feeding a worldwide fashion for beaver felt hats. In 1829, he joined an overland expedition led by veteran trapper Ewing Young that crossed the deserts of Arizona and reached the Spanish missions of California. The trip taught him how to find pasture for exhausted pack animals, how to render beaver pelts into trade-ready plues, and how to negotiate in Spanish with Mexican officials who considered many American trappers intruders. By the time he returned to Taos in 1831, he was earning a full share of the profits, a mark of respect among mountain men who measured worth by endurance and skill. During the 1830s, Carson roamed a vast circuit that ran from the southern Rockies to the Green River County of present-day Wyoming. Each summer, he gathered with hundreds of trappers, native allies, and suppliers at the Rendezvous, a week-long open-air market where whiskey flowed and fur companies bought pelts for freight back to St. Louis. At the 1835 gathering on the Green River, he met Bay, known to English speakers as Singing Grass, a young Arapaho woman. After he won her hand over a rival French trapper. The couple married in native custom and later had a daughter named Adeline. Singing Grass died of a fever in 1838, a loss that darkened Kit's usually steady temperament and reminded him how fragile life remained on the frontier. Carson's reputation grew with every winter hunt. Fellow trappers praised his calm under fire during skirmishes with Blackfeet warriors along the Yellowstone and his uncanny sense for spotting fresh beaver sign, the tiny sticks and wood chips that marked an active lodge. He spoke Spanish with Mexican traders, Comanche with Plains horsemen, and a trade jargon of words from several tribes, making him a valuable mediator when tempers flared. In 1841, while wintering on the Arkansas River, he entered a brief Cheyenne marriage to a woman called Making Out Road. The union ended amicably when she chose to remain with her people. By 1840, the beaver market was collapsing as silk hats replaced felt in European fashion, but Carson had already proved himself a resourceful guide whose knowledge of every river ford and mountain pass would soon draw the attention of army officers and explorers. Guide, pathfinder, and national fame, 1842 to 1848. In the spring of 1842, Kit Carson met a young army officer named John Charles Frémont at Bent's Fort on the upper Arkansas River. Frémont was assembling a small party to chart the route to South Pass in what is now Wyoming, and he hired Carson as chief guide for the princely wage of $100 a month. Carson led the column across the plains, over the Laramie Range, and up the Wind River County, pointing out reliable springs and safe fords that fur trappers had never bothered to record. Frémont's published report praised Carson's steadiness in a blizzard near modern Fremont Peak, and credited him with saving the expedition's instruments after a mule stampeded into a ravine. When the pamphlet reached Washington, it fired the public imagination, and newspapers began to treat Carson as the living spirit of the frontier. Frémont immediately asked him back for a second survey in 1843 that pushed through the Great Basin, skirted the Salt Flats of Utah, and crossed the Sierra Nevada just ahead of winter. Carson's tracks soon dotted maps from Missouri to the Pacific. On the third expedition in 1845, he guided Frémont into Mexican California, where rising tension between American settlers and Mexican authorities burst into the Bear Flag Revolt. Carson helped seize the pueblo of Sonoma, then carried dispatches through enemy lines to Commodore Stockton at San Diego. During the Mexican-American War, he fought at San Pascual, a vicious engagement in the chaparral outside present-day San Diego, and slipped south to raise reinforcements when the American column was pinned down. His rides of hundreds of miles across hostile territory, recounted in army communiques and penny weeklies, transformed him from regional scout into national folk hero. Between journeys, Carson found time for a quieter milestone. On February 6, 1843, in the parish church at Taos, he married Maria Josefa Jaramillo, the 17-year-old daughter of a prominent New Mexican family. The union strengthened his ties to the Hispanic communities, whose language he already spoke and whose homesteads provided winter refuge between expeditions. By the end of the Mexican campaign in 1848, Carson's name had become shorthand for the rugged skills that Americans believed were opening the continent, even as his own exploits hinted at the coming collision between expansion and the people who already called the Southwest home. Indian agent and Civil War service, 1854 to 1865. When the fur trade collapsed and exploration commissions grew scarce, Kit Carson accepted President Pierce's appointment as United States Indian agent for the Muache-Ute and Jicarilla Apache. In 1854. Stationed in Taos, he learned the slow rhythm of government paperwork, petitioning Washington for blankets, seed corn, and the beef rations promised by treaty. He rode hundreds of miles each season to distribute annuities, counseled headmen who feared the loss of hunting grounds, and tried to restrain American squatters who ignored reservation boundaries. Carson's friendship with many Ute leaders helped avert open war after the 1854 Fort Pueblo killings, yet chronic shortages of supplies convinced him that kindness alone could not protect native families from the advancing tide of settlement. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 pulled him back into uniform. New Mexico Governor Henry Connolly commissioned him colonel of the 1st New Mexico Mexico Volunteer Cavalry, a mixed force of Hispanos, Puebloans, and Anglo-frontiersmen. On February 21st, 1862, Carson's regiment fought in the swirling sand of the Battle of Valverde, forming a rear guard that allowed Union forces to withdraw in good order while the Confederates held the field. After the Confederate retreat from the territory, Brigadier General James Henry Carleton ordered Carson to turn his attention to raids by Mescalero Apaches in the Sacramento Mountains. Carson struck their winter camp, destroyed corn caches, and persuaded hundreds of Apaches to surrender at the New Bosque Redondo Reservation near Fort Sumner. Carleton soon applied the same hard strategy to the Navajo, whose homelands stretched from Canyon de Chelly to the San Juan River. In the winter of 1863-64, Carson led a scorched earth campaign that burnt peach orchards, seized sheep herds, and fouled water holes, forcing more than 8,000 Navajo men, women, and children to give up. They were marched 300 miles to Bosque Redondo in what survivors remembered as the Long Walk, a journey marked by exposure, hunger, and loss. Carson privately doubted the reservation's barren soil could sustain so many people, but he obeyed his orders, a decision that later shadowed his record. On November 25, 1864, he crossed the Canadian River with 300 cavalrymen, 70 infantry, and 2 mountain howitzers in pursuit of Kiowa and Comanche war parties. At the adobe ruins of an old trading post, his column was encircled by as many as 2,000 mounted warriors. Carson formed a defensive square, used the howitzers to check repeated charges, then withdrew in good order when ammunition ran low. The clash, remembered as the First Battle of Adobe Walls, won him a brevet promotion to Brigadier General in March of 1865. Battered by decades in the saddle, he resigned his volunteer commission that summer and returned home to his growing family in southern Colorado Territory. Later years, 1865 to 1868. When the war ended, Kit Carson accepted a quieter post as commander of Fort Garland in the rugged San Luis Valley of Colorado Territory. Army work there was routine, and his health, already fragile after years of hard campaigning, often forced him to rest. In the autumn of 1867, he moved his family to the new ranching settlement of Boggsville on the Purgatoire River, hoping the milder climate and good schooling offered by friends Tom Boggs and John Powers would benefit his children. Carson still answered public calls for service. Early in 1868, the federal government named him Superintendent of Indian Affairs for Colorado Territory, a job that required a journey to Washington City with a delegation of Ute leaders seeking a new treaty. The trip further strained his failing heart. Carson reached Boggsville in March of 1868 only to face personal tragedy. His wife, Josefa, who had followed him through wartime bivouacs and agency rounds, died on April 27, 1868, from complications after giving birth to their daughter, Estefana. His own chest pains worsened, and later that spring he traveled the short distance to Fort Lyon to seek medical care, a decision that marked the beginning of his final chapter, death. 1868. On the afternoon of May 23, 1868, Kit Carson lay in the surgeon's quarters at Fort Lyon in Colorado Territory. Still weakened by the long trip to Washington and by the sudden loss of his wife, a bulge in the main artery of his abdomen had ruptured, and blood was flooding his airway. Sensing the end, he turned to Army Doctor Henry Tilton and whispered in Spanish, "Doctor, compadre, adios," words that mean doctor, friend, goodbye. At about 4:25 p.m., he died, aged 58. Soldiers lowered the post flag to half-mast. His friends carried his body to Taos, New Mexico, where he was buried in the small walled cemetery beside Our Lady of Guadalupe Church. In May of 1869, Josefa's remains were moved from Boggsville to rest beside him under the cottonwood trees. The graveyard now bears his name, a final marker for a man whose life had spanned the continent from Kentucky's canebrakes to the high desert of the Southwest. Legacy and lasting impact. In the decades after his death, Kit Carson's life was celebrated in dime novels and cheap and sensational booklets that thrilled readers with tales of ambushes, mountain blizzards, and narrow escapes. Publishers amplified his feats from Frémont's reports until Carson came to personify the hard-riding scout who revealed the West to an eager republic. Writers as different as DeWitt Clinton Peters in the 19th century and Hampton Sides in the 21st have used his story to explain the nation's expansion, showing how a single life could link the beaver brigades of the 1830s to the blue-coated cavalry of the Civil War. That heroic image found a permanent place on the map. Carson City, the capital of Nevada, the Carson River that threads the eastern Sierra, Carson Pass on the California Trail, and more than a dozen towns simply called Carson owe their names to him. Monuments in frontier plazas and courthouse lawns keep the legend fresh, including a larger-than-life bronze at Denver's Pioneer Monument and another in his adopted hometown of Taos. For many Americans, these markers froze Carson in an uncomplicated pose, rifle in hand, gaze fixed on the limitless horizon that seemed to invite settlement.